Meeting. So anyone who wishes to see this meeting afterwards can always just view the recording. So thanks everyone for joining today. Again, as I mentioned earlier, today's admin office hours are drive shortcuts. And just as a reminder, if you remember, the thought process around admin office hours was just for us to meet with our customers and partners and discuss some of the features and interesting topics around Google Workspace and Google Cloud. This one is, I wouldn't say urgent, but pretty top of mind for a lot of our customers. What we've heard is a lot of people aren't really understanding the materials, or the dates have been changed quite a bit as well. So there's not a lot of clarification on what's happening here. So today I'm going to be outlining what we're talking about as far as drive shortcuts, what's going to happen, and what you can expect to see from Google Workspace on your side. Okay, so this is the agenda: drive shortcuts versus legacy behavior. So we're going to talk about what is changing, drive shortcut migration. So there is a part where Google is going to be making changes to the drive interface. So the experience for your end users will change. It's not very dramatic, but it will be something that you want to be aware of. The next piece is admin options and security considerations. So with the drive shortcuts change, Google's giving you some options as an administrator on what you can proactively change as far as the behavior that you'll see within your console, or your users will see, I should say. So there's some options there. We're going to discuss those, maybe talk about what we would recommend and what works best for you as a customer. Security considerations, there's some security things that have to do with those options. So I just want to make those clear. So again, I really want to clarify a lot of this stuff if it's not clear to everyone. Last two pieces, we're not going to stay too long on developer APIs, but there are some small changes to the APIs. If you had anything making calls to the Drive API that was doing creating new files in multiple locations, like one file in multiple places, that's no longer going to work anymore. So something to read about, and I'll give you some links within the fourth and fifth slide. Actually, there's not too many links in this fifth slide. It's mostly questions, so there'll be questions and stuff. So with that said, I'll break for a second and see if anyone has any questions or anything they want to interrupt and say. Looks like we're all set. And I should mention as well, feel free to raise your hand or just ask the question as we go through it. This can definitely be an open discussion. We have enough time to go through the slides. So drive shortcuts versus legacy behavior. So, this was already a feature at the top. I kind of wanted to give you an idea of what a shortcut in Drive is. It's really just a link to a file. So, think of it as creating a file in your My Drive, and then you also want that file to live somewhere else. Typically, it'll be in a shared folder, or maybe you're changing ownership. So if it's in your My Drive, a file that you've just created, and then you change the ownership to someone else, well, the file itself is going to technically be living in two different places, right? It's going to be in your My Drive. You'll now become an editor, and it'll also be in their My Drive, and they'll be the owner. So that's going to change now. So what's going to happen in that scenario is you'll get a shortcut, and then that file will be moved to that person's My Drive. So in the end, you'll still keep your editor access, but the file itself is now going to be a link on your side. So there's going to be some interesting changes to that, where your expectations might be that there's a file that's going to be there, but in fact, it'll end up being a shortcut. But the shortcut pretty much acts the same, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. And of course, we'll have questions at the end if I'm not explaining this clearly. So this is just a little animation on how to add a shortcut to Drive, right? So you can easily just right-click on a file, click Add a Shortcut, and add that file to a shared drive. So this is the behavior that you're going to want your users to be doing if they want the file to remain in its current location and also add it to a shared drive. If they just want to move it, nothing's going to happen differently. They can just drag it on over to the shared drive, good to go. But it's really when you want to have a file living in multiple places that this shortcut scenario comes into play. All right, so timeline for migration, and this is interesting because this was pushed, but excuse me, as of the 30th of September last year, they did change the behavior. So you can't place multiple files in My Drive at the moment, including the Drive API. So you should be already experiencing shortcuts. You can still move files around, but if you're duplicating things, you should already see these magical pointers appear instead of it creating duplicates. According to Google's documentation, this rollout is completed, so you should already see that. If you haven't, it's probably going to be coming very shortly because they did push the migration portion of this. This is the actual feature change, but the migration portion has to do with your existing duplicate files, right? And I know that we were just earlier talking about a customer who has multiple duplicate files in many locations, and they were saying, you know, I need to find out how we can deal with the duplicate files. So the good news is you don't have to do anything. You can change the admin option we're going to talk about, but Google is kind of not giving you a choice. They're going to be migrating all of those duplicated files into shortcuts. So if you have 10 files that are duplicated around the, you know, when I say duplicated, I mean it's the same file, but linked in many different places in a shared drive. I'm not talking about like if you take a file and you copy it, right? That's not going to change. You can still copy files. This is really from a sharing perspective, right? Like if I create a file in my drive and then I put it in a shared drive and that file's also in another shared drive, that file right now, the legacy behavior means it would actually have that file in multiple locations. It would actually duplicate itself when you do that sharing. And this shortcut is now going to only have one real file, and these shortcuts will be created instead when you make those sharings. So it's really just a pointer change. So that the behavior of you being able to duplicate files by changing ownership or moving files into multiple shared drives, that's already changed. But your existing files are going to be migrated. So let's talk about the migration. So Google Drive end users will be seeing a banner at the top of their Google Drive. So there is gonna, you know, your users are gonna see something notifying that this shortcut change is happening. Now they won't have to do anything. There's no steps they need to take, but it's just like a little note for them to see. So you, depending on your organizational communications, you know, in some cases, some organizations like to plan and, you know, send this out to expect that banner. So this migration will now happen because the original date was in 2021. It was now moved over to 2022. And so this will automatically happen, and admins will get an email several weeks before letting you know that this migration is going to happen. If any of you are like me and are just like, whoa, what if I missed it and it already happened, right? The good news is like any of these changes are going to appear in the admin audit log. Right. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, but just keep in mind, you know, if you're not listening to me and you're also in your admin console at the same time, sometimes I'd like to do that. You can maybe do that as we're speaking. Just check your admin audit log. Chances are it didn't happen yet because this is like, they said January, but from what I've seen, it's still rolling out. So you should get an email that this is going to happen. And then you'll have this option, this proactive feature we're going to talk about in the admin panel that you can change. Before we go into that, I want to talk a little bit about how it's going to work. So how is this migration going to work? When items are replaced with shortcuts. So it's going to remove all files except for one, right? And it's going to replace all the other multiple locations with a shortcut. This is the important part that, like, this is the things admins are going to want to know, right? Like, so how are you going to decide which one stays and which one turns into a shortcut? So it's going to be a mix of different things. It's going to be based on the original file and folder ownership, but it's also going to consider the activity, as you can see here. So if the file is like the most active one, the one that's going to cause the least disruption for your for collaborators, right? And most of the disruption is really just going to be to understand it's a shortcut and the way it works, kind of in if they're using Drive for desktop. I think backup and sync is going to be a little bit. It's really where you're going to see the change, but most people should be using Drive for desktop anyway. So the other thing is the replacement process won't change the ownership or sharing permission. So that's perfect, right? And previously, when you moved like a shortcut into a shared folder, it wouldn't ask you if you wanted to change the permissions, but they're going to actually make it do that now. So side note, the process is automatic and doesn't require any actions from your users. Yeah, so as mentioned, it's automatic. And I also mentioned anytime this happens, you're going to see it in the admin audit log. So you can always see that this has occurred, although you will be notified as we talked about as well. All right, I just talked about a lot of different things. I got a lot more stuff to tell you, obviously, but I want to stop and just make sure I'm not giving you too much information. Any questions? Is this clear so far? All right. Raise the hand. All right. Can we unmute Kim so she can, or I don't know, Kim, if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah. You mentioned that people should be using the desktop for the drive for desktop.
Yes.
As it happens now, who's the owner when somebody's using drive for desktop and they're putting it from their computer directly into a shared drive and it's not taking any time through their personal My Drive?
So anything you place in a shared drive, the owner becomes the organization. So technically, once you put a file in a shared drive, there is no owner. It's just your company.
Okay, but if they're putting it in multiple shared drives, then how are those considered duplicates for part of this migration, or are those considered copies?
That's a great question. That's a great question. So if you're moving a file, and we're talking about from drive for desktop or backup and sync, right?
Right.
Okay. So if you're moving a file, it's just going to move. If you have a file in your My Drive and you're doing Control K, and then you drag it to another folder, Control K the legacy behavior will create that duplicate we're talking about. So you'll have the file that you originally created will remain in its current place, and then it will duplicate that file in a shared drive. And this is the instance where that Control K is now going to be a shortcut. So it will move a shortcut into the shared drive, and the original file will stay where it is.
But in the instance where the user is taking something from their desktop and using drive for desktop and copying it and moving it into one folder, one shared drive, and then taking that same file from their desktop and copying it into a second shared drive, are those two files considered two different copies, or is that going to be part of this shortcut migration where one of them is going to be made into a shortcut?
Yeah, that's a great question. So consider it the fact that when your file is on your computer and it has no attachment to the cloud or anything like that, there is no owner. So technically, when you're doing what you're saying, it's creating a new file each time. So it's not going to be a duplicate. It's going to be like, I'm taking a file from my drive, I'm putting it in a shared drive, then I'm taking a file from my drive, then I'm putting it in my shared drive. Those are all different files from a Google perspective, because the file itself resides on your own computer. It's not like in your My Drive yet. Once it goes into your My Drive, and then you start moving things around, that's when the shortcuts and stuff start to come into play. But from your computer, hard drive, local disk, moving stuff around is not going to be affected by this shortcut change. Or moving a file into a shared folder won't affect the shortcut thing either. It'll just be a new file. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, okay. I don't know if I was being clear, but yeah, that's a great question. It's very confusing stuff. And please keep them coming. If you have any other questions. Kim, do you have any other ones? Nope. Okay. All right, let's keep going. So that's that. Let's go on to the next slide. So we're replacing files and folders that are stored in multiple folders in Google Drive with shortcuts. This change simplifies your folder and file structure and helps reduce confusion. So this is basically the thought process around why they're doing it, to reduce confusion and having multiple files with multiple parent locations. So one location is preserved for files and folders currently contained in multiple locations. So if you have a file that's, again, owned by you, and then you change the owner to someone else, right? That means it's the same file, but it's owned by you. Well, you're now an editor, and it's also owned by someone else, but it's residing in your My Drive and their My Drive. This is the kind of instance where they want to stop that. So you would get a shortcut, and the owner would become get the original file in their My Drive. Ownership and sharing permissions for files and folders are preserved. So as mentioned, nothing around the sharing is going to change. And we talked about the audio log. So it's just a reminder there. So how does the replacement affect visibility access and visibility to items. So users who had access to an item before the replacement can still access it. So nothing is going to change there. This is going to touch on the security piece I was talking about. So anyone with access to a folder will get shortcuts in the folder, even if they don't have access to the individual item in the folder. So this is one of the important parts I wanted us to touch on. So what this means is if I have a shared folder and it's shared with the HR group, okay? Right now, every file that's in the HR group shared drive, has inherited the rights of the shared drive. So technically, it's shared with the HR group. Every file in there should be shared with the HR group. However, you can also put files in there with different sharing rights, right? So if I have, I could always drop a file in there and then share that file with different people, a different group, and just that file will have different rights. So the people who have access to the folder might not have access to all the files within, if that makes sense. So the HR group has access to everything shared with them, but there might be files in there that are actually not shared with the HR group. The inherited rights were changed. So the HR group doesn't inherit those rights. They were changed. They're only going to someone else. Now with this change, because that file might be a shortcut, the shortcut will appear for the HR group, even though they don't have access to that file. So previously, because they didn't have access to that file wouldn't appear in that shared folder. It just wouldn't show up for them. They'd only be able to see what files they had access to. Now they'll see a shortcut to a file that they don't have access to. Is that clear? Let me know if that's not clear. That's a hard one to wrap your head around. Users that didn't have access to an item can't open it, even if they have the shortcut. So that's what I just mentioned. If you choose to create shortcuts only for your domain or trusted domain, so this is the option you're going to get. So as mentioned, Kim has a great question. Okay, hold on just a moment. So as I just mentioned, right, they might see shortcuts they don't have access to. There is an admin option that you're going to be able to proactively choose to change that behavior. So we're going to talk about that in a moment, but go ahead, Kim.
If you have a group that's got access to a whole folder and one of the files within that folder is also shared to somebody who's not part of the whole group, does that mean that the person who only had access to the one file will now see everything else in the folder as shortcuts? Or does that only work if it's the other way around? If you have a group that didn't have access to something within the folder,
right,
they're now going to see that.
Yeah, it's at the folder level. So they would need rights to the folder level to be able to see the shortcuts they don't have access to. If they only have access to one file, it wouldn't work that way. Yeah. With
the shortcuts, do you get preview mode, or would they be able to back end around seeing what's in that file by doing a preview?
No, they would not be able to have any access to the file using a preview.
Okay.
Yes. Great questions. The details window, like when you're in the drive and you click on I in the corner and it gives that details window, that won't work. But just that won't work for people who don't have access to files, but it will remain the same for shared for shortcuts if you have access to the file.
Gotcha. Okay, great.
Awesome. Great questions, Kim. Keep them coming. All right, so I'll keep going unless there's any other questions. So we stopped here. I'm not going to read through this because we're going to talk about the features, but basically the option, the idea here is that they're going to give you an option for admins to proactively choose if you want those shortcuts to be seen by people. So there's an option for that. Then there's this last piece that's kind of confusing. If a user changes a folder access permissions at the same time that the replacement process happens, the replacement process takes precedence. Any access changes for items that now have shortcuts in that folder might not be fully implemented. So basically during the migration, right, if you start messing with the access permissions, this might happen. It'll take precedence. The migration will take precedence. No big deal because it's going to happen pretty quickly and you're going to get an email, but there might be a few quirks during that time. Control when to create shortcuts in a shared folder. So this is the admin option. So here you go. Everyone with access to a shared folder gets shortcuts in that folder. That's the first option. Only users from your organization and trusted domains get shortcuts in a shared folder. That's the other option. So you can use your only people in your organization and trusted domains. And then only users in your organization get shortcuts in a shared folder. So only just your only people in your organizations, or don't create shortcuts for items in shared folders where access permissions vary. So that means that in that scenario, it just won't have, it won't create a shortcut at all. It won't allow you to create shortcuts in shared drives that have different access permissions than the parent. So if you just want to disable that weird thing I talked about, you could do that. I forgot which one Google recommends, to be honest, but there's like a support page. I think it might be this one. I'm not sure. I'll have to confirm with you afterwards, but we can check the support page together. All right, so the last little piece here, or one of the last pieces, is the developer APIs. We're not going to spend too much time on this guy right here. There's a link at the bottom that'll give you all the details in regards to the APIs. So these are like if you have scripts that are making calls and doing things within Drive automatically. Any third-party applications are probably going to be proactively coding this change for you, you know, if you're using like AODocs or something. But if you had your own custom scripts, you might have to take a look at those and change this. These are just 2 of them, 7 or something changes, but it's really around like new file creation and obviously sharing. All right, so I made the same slide twice. Okay, so this was supposed to be TLDR, so too long don't read. This is like my last kind of recap slides of what we were talking about. So this is the change. The first change here is in regards to that Shift-Z thing. It wasn't Control-Z, I'm sorry. I'm a Mac user, so Shift-Z. So if you are using backup and sync and you do Shift-Z, it would place a file in multiple locations, right? And now it's going to do a shortcut instead. This is the part regarding backup and sync. Again, hopefully you're using Drive for desktop. But for backup and sync, all it's saying is it's if you move like a single file to another place that has a folder, it's going to create a folder for it. So this is what it says. It'll create a shortcut if a single file or multiple items are selected. Though, if it's a single folder that is selected, this keyboard shortcut will still add another folder location so that backup and sync offline functionality isn't compromised. So basically with the UI, you're going to see a folder difference of some kind, but like it'll still just be pointing to a shortcut. The behavior is going to be the same, but it says it needs to add another folder location. So I'm not sure what that looks like, to be honest. Hopefully most people are on Drive for desktop, but this might be something to test out. But again, the end result is that you still get a shortcut. It's just that this another single folder location is something to watch out for. Multiple locations of a file used to be created when designing someone else as the owner. So this is what I was explaining earlier. So if you have a file and you're in your Drive and you change the owner, multiple files would be created, right? Or the file would reside in multiple locations, not multiple files. I keep saying multiple files. What I mean is multiple locations. So multiple locations would have that file. So what I mean is that person's My Drive would have the file who created it. They changed the owner. It would also go to that new owner's My Drive. So it's the same file with multiple locations. Now, if I take a file in My Drive and I change the owner, I will now get a shortcut in My Drive, and the person who's now the owner will get that file in their My Drive. So the file will only reside in one place with shortcuts everywhere else. So again, it's to change multiple locations, not multiple files. I think that's why I was confusing Kim earlier, so apologies. So multiple locations of a file will be created when you change ownership, and instead the file will remain in the same place. And the new owner, the new owner will get the file and the old owner will get a shortcut. Last piece here, Google is also making it easier to find files that have been lost. So if a file's last location was removed because a file was added to a shared drive and then the owner of the shared drive deleted the file, it would kind of get just lost in the ether. It wouldn't delete the file, right? But it would just no longer be anywhere, and you could still find it with searching. But now Google's going to put that file back in the original owner's My Drive. So that's a big one. I've heard of a lot of customers being like, I don't know, it was in the shared drive and then it disappeared. And when you check the audit logs, it's because the owner of the shared drive deleted it. So this is a big one, right? This is going to return that file to the original owner's My Drive instead of just like leaving it in the drive ether. Kim, you have a question. Go right ahead. Thank you.
We have a lot of freelancers that aren't, they don't have accounts within our domain that create files for us that they put into a shared drive.
Yes.
What happens with those? Where does that go back to if it gets accidentally deleted? If it's a shortcut instead of a real file, in that case, what happens with our access to that file later?
Great questions. So if you have a shortcut in a shared folder, right, and you delete it, you're going to delete the shortcut. The file will remain. You have to delete the original to delete the file itself, right? You're deleting the shortcut otherwise.
Right, but if we've asked them to put it into a shared drive, and
Yes.
so the ownership has changed to the shared drive,
Yes.
and then it gets accidentally deleted from the shared drive, you're saying that it goes back to the original owner's My Drive. But if the original owner is somebody who's just got a regular Gmail and is not one of our normal users because they're a freelancer or a vendor, what then happens with those files?
As per the documentation that we're reading, it would return the file to the Gmail owner and it would be removed from your environment. So that's my expectation, but that's a very specific question that I think we would want to ask Google to be sure upon, because honestly, when you think about it, once the file's leaving your organization, it gets a little tricky, right? So there is a possibility that Google's going to do something so that the file remains in your environment. So we'd have to ask that. I'd have to investigate that. That was a really good question. I'm just going to take a note here. Original owner is outside of organization. Creates shares file in company shared drive. File is deleted. What happens? All right, I'll ask about that one. That's a great question. And that's with that question, Kim, if you have any others, keep them coming, because that is basically the end of the slides. I think the only thing I might have been confusing you with, just to be clear, is that I kept saying multiple files, but this is about multiple locations. So if it's one file that is in multiple locations from a sharing perspective, not if you're duplicating files. So like Kim's question about, copying files or moving files from your computer into a folder and then moving the same file into a different folder, that's duplication. That's not, like sharing changes. And it's really hard to make this happen, to make this like this thing that it's trying to stop is not easy to duplicate. And the ways that you duplicate it are really these things here. So you would be in Drive for, backup and sync, and then Shift Z, right? That's one way you can create this duplicate location of the same file, right? That's the first way. The second way is if you change ownership. And then the third way, actually that's it. So, dragging stuff around and moving it is not going to affect this. It's really when you are trying to have the same file reside in multiple locations, which is not a common thing. So again, it's not duplication, it's not copying, it's the same file in multiple locations. So I hope that's clear. And if not, I'm happy to, clarify anything you might have questions on. Any questions? No? Kim, all right, go right ahead.
One more for me.
Yes.
So in the past, we've got people who've done this, and we've also had people who have working with my with Drive from my desktop or desktop Drive, put files into multiple shared drives. How do we as an admin know which type it is, so we know whether it's a copy, an actual copy, a separate file, versus one of these multiple ownership, multiple space files?
I'm not sure if I get your question, but I think that like what I would do is I would just show you quickly on my screen from a drive and see if that helps, and then if not, please clarify. I would love to answer that, and I appreciate all the questions for sure. Okay, so when I have a file, let's just go to, say, I have a file in here. No, I don't. How well prepared I am. I'm sure one of these things has a file. All right, here we go. That's already a shortcut. Jesus. Okay. Whew. All right, so we got a file. I can move this file, right? I can just move it around. It's going to ask me if I want to, I think, right? Yeah. Make sure I can move it, right? Or I can hold Option, and then you see the little icon up here.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be a shortcut. So if I move it here, it's not changing the rights, but it's going to make sure, like, this is the new feature they just added, because this wouldn't have popped up before. But now with this new feature changes we're talking about, this is going to pop up and make sure that the people that are in this folder are shared on the file now. So now this resides in here as a shortcut.
Okay, so I have users who don't always come back to the Drive interface to share with new people. They forward the email that they got or that they originally were CC'd on to a new person. So they don't always know whether it's a shortcut or an actual file or where it's located. So when things get migrated and become shortcuts, will they still be able to do that? Be able to send it, forward an email that they had gotten before?
Yeah. That's such a great question. Yeah, so that's part of the access checker changes that were launched a couple, like a month ago. So yes, if you attach like a Drive shortcut and you send it out to a group and they're not shared on it, it's gonna tell you, these people are not shared on it. Do you want to add sharing?
Right, but I don't see that happen when you forward an email that already has the link in it, and that's where my users get confused. They go to forward the email that they got with the link to a new person, and that person is someone that's part of their shared drive group.
Yep.
Would that it doesn't check again if it's part of the forwarded part of the email, the link, only if it's a new part of the email that's got the link in it.
That's right. Yep.
So would those new shortcuts still be shared to that same list of people?
So when you're
plus the new person. So Tina, Joe, and John want to send a link that they've been working on to Tom, and Tom wasn't originally part of that. What happened? The list of people, the group that was shared for that folder. Now that it's a shortcut, what happens?
Well, what happens now that it's not a shortcut? Tell me that part first, Kim.
If it's not a shortcut, then the owner, which is IT, gets a little alert that says, "Hey, this person is requesting permission to open it." And if they were part of the group,
so
the department, then they can open it.
That's the part I wasn't getting. Okay, so it's going to be exactly the same. So if they get a link, they have to click on it, then they have to try to open it, and then they have to request access. The same
Gotcha.
thing that you just mentioned. Yes, because I was
Okay.
thinking attachment, right? If they send it as an
Right.
attachment, right? Totally the same. Great question. Yeah. So they'll click the link. It'll go to the shortcut. The shortcut will go to the file, and then it'll say request access. Boom, and then the person will get a request access. Drive sharing. Perfect question.
Perfect.
Lovely. Any others, Kim? I mean, this is great. I think the questions are probably helping others listening in, and I think people that might listen to the recording. So feel free to ping any others.
Good.
Awesome. Well, if no one else has any other questions, that has been the point of today's explanation. I think the only takeaway is it's not super impactful just because, again, if you remember what it takes to duplicate locations of a file or have multiple locations in the same file, it's a lot, right? Control K or changing ownership. Maybe the changing ownership is really going to be the biggest one. But other than that, the shortcut behavior is very much the same. It just looks a little bit different. So there might be some change management that you want to do. And of course, from a Suitebriar perspective, we have a full communications team, professional services team. So if you have any questions, concerns, or need any assistance with this or anything else, let us know. And then lastly, if you have any ideas for the next admin office hours or any topics you'd like to see us cover, whether or not it's security related or anything around the platform, we're always open to ideas, especially from our lovely customers. So let us know at your convenience. With that, thank you guys so much for joining. I hope everyone has a great rest of the day.